Hi guys, welcome to Piece of Code and welcome to this video. And in this video we are going to talk about the Java date and time API, right? And starting with Java 8, right, and Java 8 and above, Oracle completely revamped how we work with date and times. You can still write the code the old way like we did it before Java 8, and it was like a little bit complicated and it was not that much good. But from the exam perspective, right, you are not gonna asked on the old way of creating dates and times in Java. You're gonna be tested on the new way of creating Java date and time from Java 8, right? But we are gonna reference to the old way of creating the date and time so that you can compare, right, how the new date and time API is better than the old one, right? So the topics we're going to cover today is creating date and times, manipulating date and times, working with periods, formatting date and times, and parsing date and times. This much knowledge about date and time is, sufficient for the exam as well as for your day-to-day life coding and stuff, right? All right. Now let us talk about creating date and times. Okay. So when we're going to talk about date and time in Java, there are three main classes which you're going to deal with in the date and time API, right? So the first one is the local date, right? So the local date contains just a date, so no time and no time zone, right? A good example of local date is like a birthday or any kind of date, just the date. If you're gonna work with time, then you're gonna use the local time class. Basically it just contains a time with no date and no time zone, right? If you're gonna write like midnight or afternoon or for a particular time, then you're gonna use the local time. Now local date time is that which contains both date and time. So using this particular class you will be able to manipulate both date and time at the same time. So based on your requirements, you're gonna use either of these three classes. So let us see each class one by one. Alright, so let us see some basic ways of creating these local date time and local time objects. And one important thing before we move forward is that Oracle recommends avoiding time zones unless you really need them. Okay, try to act as if everyone or everything is in the same time zone when you can. If you do need to communicate across time zones, zoned date time, there is a class that is let me just go back a bit, that is zoned date time. You can use this if you want to communicate across different time zones and stuff, but for normal cases local date time and local date time is enough for you guys. So let me just go to my Eclipse editor and let us try this out. So I'm just going to create a new package over here. So right click, new package, and I'm going to name this package as date and time API, something like that. And I'm going to create a new class over here in this case, and I'm going to name the class as something like dates and time, something like that, and public static void. So to create a simple local date, local time, or local date time object, we can create it by using the .now method, which is a static method in those classes. Let us try this out. Okay, so let me do a sysout over here and let us write this thing local date dot now. And if you wanna save some time, let us just copy these two more times, and instead of local date it is local time, and then it is local date time. So basically by using the now method you are actually creating an instance of this local date and this local time and the local date time, right? Each of these three classes has a static method called now that we already know, right? And they give the current date and time. It will give the current date in this case, this will give the current time in this case, and this will be giving the current date and time altogether. Now one thing to keep in mind, they are actually not returning strings and stuff, they are actually returning instance, that particular local date instance it is returning, and using that particular object we can also chain a lot of more methods to it. We're going to see that later on how to manipulate and stuff, but for now just remember that the .now method just returns you an instance of that particular class. Right, now let us just run this code right now. Just gonna go right right click and run as a Java application, and if you see, we are getting the, it has a default format. If you want a separate format, we're going to talk about formats later on in the chapter. And this is, you can see that it's a current time, so now it is 5:28, so that's the time. And then the local date time is, it is separated by T, so it means that from here this is the time, right? So I hope you guys got how to create simple instances of the particular time, local date, local time, and local date time. All right, now that you know how to create the current date and time, let's look at other specific dates and times, right? How can you create a specific date and time? Now you can create a specific date using local date, and there are a few number of methods which has different signatures in the local date of method, right? So one of the signatures is public static local date of, and you can pass in the year, the month, and the day of month. So it will create a date using this information, right? And then we have the local date of, it accepts year, month. In this case, the int month is like a series of numbers. If you want the month as 1, like January, then you take 1 over there, then February 2, and something like that. But here actually it accepts a enum. You can just pass month dot January, month dot February. So either of those, if you want to use anything, it's up to you. Doesn't matter if you use this format or this format. Okay. Now let us see how we can just create a specific date. So I'm just gonna say local date date1 equals to LocalDate.of, and I'm gonna say the year as, for example, 2023, month as 1, and then day of month, for example, today is whatever, 5, I don't know. And if I just copy this, paste it, and instead of 1, I'm just gonna say month dot January, right? Both of them will give you the same output. So if I just say, let me just change it to date 2 over here, and here if I do sys out, okay, and if I say date 1 and then sys out, I don't know what is happening to my typing today, it's pretty pathetic. So you can see we get the same output, right? So month is a special type of class which is an enum, you already know that. So, and you don't have to know about enums on the OCA exam, and it is actually pretty simple to create enum. They are just constants, right? If you want to create multiple constants which are going to use in your project a lot, so instead of using strings, it's better to create enums. That's a better practice actually. Okay, now talking about the time, local time. Now you understood how can we create the local date, right? Now let us talk about the local time. So when creating a time, you can choose actually how detailed you want to be. You can just specify like the hour or the minute, you can do that, or you can add the number of seconds also. You can even add nanoseconds if you want to be very precise. So according to that, there are a couple of signatures of the local time of method. So you see one of those accepts hour and minute, another one accepts hour, minute, and second, other one accepts hour, minute, seconds, and nanoseconds. So it just goes like as much precise as you want to go. You can choose any of these signatures. Let us try this out, right? Let us create a time object, and let us say local time, and I'm gonna say time1 equals to, for example, local time dot of, and we're gonna say the hour as, for example, 6, and the minute as, for example, 20 minutes, right? And let us copy this and let us create a couple of more objects of local time. So time2, and here it is time3, and here in we're gonna go 6 hours 20 minutes and 15 seconds, and 15 seconds, and for example 200 nanoseconds, right? Gonna do that, and sys out time1, sys out time 2, and then sys out time 3. Cool. Now if I run the code, you can see that here we say this only shows us the hour and the minute where it is 6:20, then this is the seconds, and here we also have the dot nanoseconds over here. So I hope that makes sense now, right? Now let us talk about the third class. If you want to combine dates and times, this is actually which is the local date time class, right? And it has actually a lot of signatures, because you can create the date and time at once, right? And basically you can talk about like how you can create the local date time objects. So if I go over here into my slides, and if I see the local date time signatures, method signatures, let me just make it a little bit bigger so that it is visible to you guys. So we have one of those methods of local DateTimeOf, which accepts year, month, day of month, hour, minute. Then we have year, month with a second also, minute, second. We can also go till the nanos, right? Year, month, day of month, hour, minute, second, nano. So it is a combination of both your local date and your local time classes, you can just say. Then we have with the month with the enum, right? And there are a lot of other things like year, month with the enum, int, day of month, hour, minute, second. So just the combinations of both the off methods of the local date and local time classes, right? So whatever goes around with you can just pick that one and work with it, right? So it has a lot of signatures. Okay. Now another thing to keep in mind is okay, let us first create an example of local date time and let us discuss that important thing, right? So let us say local date time, and I'm gonna just say date time 1 equals to local date time dot, for example, of. I'm gonna use that constructor which says for example 2023, and then we have that minute, right? Minute, for example, okay, sorry, 2023, and then we have the month. I'm saying minute, my bad. Month dot, for example, February, and then let's take the day is 20, then 6 hours, 20 minutes and 30 seconds, right? And if I try to print it, I hope it will show me the date and time of this particular thing that I have passed in the off method, right? So date time 1, and let us set there's some error over here. Let me remove this, and if we just run this, then yeah, that is working. One of the cool thing about the local date time, I think we saw that over here, is that the local date time also accepts the local date and the local time objects as parameter. It means that if you create a specific local date and a local time, and you want to create a local date time object out of it, it is pretty much simple. Just pass in those local date and local time as parameters to the off method of local date time, and it will create a local date time object out of it. So you don't have to pass this precise things over and over again, right? If you have a local date object and a local time object, just construct a local date time object out of it. How to do that? Pretty simple. So gonna get this thing done right away. Local date time 2 equals to local date time dot of. I'm gonna pass the date 1 and time as, for example, time 2, right? And that's it. So date 1 corresponds to this date, which is this one, and time 2 corresponds to this particular local time object. So it should construct a date time 2 object out of this particular thing. I hope that makes sense. Now I'm gonna say date time 2. Okay, let me just go up, and I think that should work now. Yes, it is working. Alright, so basically I hope you can work around with all those signatures, whatever you want, it's fine. So one thing to keep in mind while working with local date and local time object is that the date and time classes have private constructors, right? So if in the exam they give something like local date d equals to new local date, right? And for example, if they give something like this, then this will throw a compiler error, because they have private constructors. So actually you cannot use the new keyword to create a constructor, object of the local date class, for example. And it is true for all the date time classes, not only local date. So this off method that you see, basically in the off method, it uses the new keyword in the off method to create an object for you. So you cannot directly create the object. Instead of that, you have to use the off method to create the object. And one other thing to keep in mind is that the local date, local date time and local time classes, whatever Java date and time API classes, are immutable in nature. It means that similarly like the string, whenever we perform an operation on a string, it returns you a new instance of a string, right? Similarly, when we are going to perform some operations on these classes also, we are gonna receive a new instance of the class. So keep those things in mind, guys, because the examiner may try to trick you, and I don't want you guys to get tricked. I hope that makes sense. All right. So let's see some things that may throw some errors, right? So if I try to do this thing, sys out, I'm gonna try to do a local date, and for example, I'm gonna do a off, and I'm gonna say, for example, 2020, and month is, for example, 2, and I'm gonna say the day of month as 32, right? Now if I run the code, then there will be a date time exception. So remember that whenever there is a problem with the parameters that you pass into the off method, for example, in this case I'm passing a number which is 32, and in this case the month cannot be 32, right? It can be maximum 30 or 31. In that case we get a date time exception. So always remember that we're gonna receive date time exception EPT in some cases, and one of those cases is this case. Alright, makes sense. So let us talk about what happened before the introduction of Java 8, right? How did we deal with creating this dates, times and everything in previous to Java 8, right? And let us see that in my slides, because I'm not going to give you any active examples of like how to deal with previous Java 8 features, because it is actually not required. But still, for comparison purposes, this is how we used to do when before Java 8. So okay, not this. Okay, so if you see this particular table over here, so the old way was to import java.util.star. So the classes that we used to do, the date class used to be in the java.util package, and it is still there, you can still use it. New way is that we import it from the java.time.star package. So we were able to use the new keyword to create an instance of the date class. That's how we used to manipulate dates before, but now we have to use the now method .now, which is a static method, to create the instance. So current date and time was the same way, like creating the object of date without any parameters in the constructor. Here we just say now, that's it. Creating an object representing January 1, 2015. Now the date class itself was not completely cool, right? You had to use the calendar class to create a separate date, and then create a date instance from the get time method of the calendar class, and that is really annoying, and I don't ever use this thing. But now if you see, using the local date, it is pretty much easy to do this, right? And this one is a very longer process, and why will you do this? Doesn't make any sense. So if you don't want to use the constant, then you can use this c.set method and pass in like 2015, 0 and 1. And yeah, in the calendar class, right, .set method, where we pass in the year, the month and the date, if you see, the month starts from 0, which is pretty weird in my opinion, because okay, you are following the concept of indexes, where indexes starts from 0, 1, 2, likewise, but you should make it better for the users to understand that okay, if I'm using this API, the months should start from 1, but instead of that it is starting from 0, which is pretty much of annoying for me. That's why please try to use the new Java date and time API. I hope that makes a lot of sense. Alright, it is not gonna ask you questions in the exam, or not gonna use this thing in a day-to-day lives, and also this is not gonna be asked in any interviews also, because it is pretty old and it is not getting used at all. So let us talk about some new features, new cool features. We're gonna not waste our time or make yourselves bored, right? So let us talk about manipulating dates and times. So basically you can add, subtract, jump to a particular date and do a lot of stuff using dates and times, right? And there are specific methods to do that, cannot do that like directly. So adding to a date is pretty easy, right? The date and time classes are immutable, as I've already told you. It means that you need to remember to assign the results of these methods to a reference variable. That's what I mean, because when you perform some operations on the date class, local date class for example, it will return you a new instance and you need to store it somewhere if you want to reuse the current instance, right? So let us see some methods which are present in the local date class or some other things. So this is just a summary of all the things, right? The date and time methods. So if you wanna plus years, it means that it will add years or minus years. Like if you wanna subtract, for example, 2 years from your instance, then you're gonna use this plus years. Then there is plus months and minus months to add and remove months. Plus weeks and minus weeks to add and remove weeks. Plus days, minus days to add and remove days. Simple as that. Plus hours, plus minutes, plus seconds, plus nanos. And another thing to keep in mind while working with these methods is that on which instance can you call these methods. So you have to be sure that okay, the instance that I'm calling this method on is a correct or a what it is called, a compatible instance. It means that if you're gonna call this plus hours on a local date object, does it make any sense? Because local date doesn't deal with plus hours, like doesn't deal with hours, minutes or seconds. It deals with years, months and days. So it makes a lot of sense if you're gonna call these three methods on the local date object, because these are years, months and weeks. If you're gonna call a plus hours or minus hours on local date, it is not possible, right? Similarly, for local time, you can call all the time methods for local time, hours, minutes, seconds and nanos, right? And if you see, you can call all the methods on a local date time instance, because obviously local date time means that it is a combination of local date and local time. I hope that makes a lot of sense. And I wanted to make this thing clear, because if in the exam you receive a question where a plus months is being called on a local time instance, then I don't want you guys to get confused, right? Just remember what methods are gonna called on which instance. Alright, now let us talk about it and let us do a little bit manipulation of dates and times, something like that. So we're gonna create a new local date. For example, we're gonna create a new local date over here, local date instance, and I'm gonna say date. I'm gonna give it a name as dates equals to not new, my bad, LocalDate.of, and let us dot of, and the year is for example 2014, month is for example month dot January, and day of month for example it is 20, right? Let us take some common examples over here, right? If I just print the date now, dates, then we're gonna get okay, there is an exception over here, so I'm just gonna comment it out from here. So we're gonna get this one as the output as of now. So if I want to add 2 days to this particular date, so I'm gonna just say sysout dates dot plus days, and we're gonna add 2 days to it. Now if I see, then you see previously it was 20 and now it is 22. Now I added a plus days 2 over to this dates instance, reference variable that we have, basically the local date instance, right? So if I, after adding 2 days, if I check back the dates instance, what do you think will be the output? Will it be 22 or will it be 20? Let's see. You see that even though we use the plus days 2 and we added 2 days to the current instance didn't change. That's what I repeatedly am saying, that local date and all of those date and time classes are immutable objects, right? So make sure that if you wanna change your current instance, store it in a separate instance and then use that particular instance now, right? Just create a new reference variable and store it. That's what I mean. Okay, And this is a very tricky question with respect to the exam, so make sure you are good with it. Alright, so this is that's how it is. And you can also add, for example, sysout dates dot plus weeks, something like that, and you can add 2 weeks to it, for example. And if you see, now the date has changed with the month because weeks had been added now. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And there are also nice and easy methods to go backward in time. And yeah, another thing to keep in mind, the concept of leap years, right? So if you are gonna deal with a leap year, and if you go back to a particular date where it is a leap year, and for example you are expected to get a February 29 on it, then you don't have to worry about that, guys. The local date and all the date time API classes are very smart. So if you are expected to get a leap year date, then it will get it for you. You just have to do the plus days, plus weeks, minus years, whatever you want to do, you can do it. So don't worry about that. If there is a leap year, I have to do some extra coding or add some extra logic to it, because it is not required at all, right? So don't worry about it. Alright, so back to the current thing that we are doing. So there are also nice and easy methods to go backward in time, like the minus things that we're gonna do, right? So let us create a new instance of the local time class. Gonna play around with a lot of local dates and times. So local time times equals to local time, and let us create this thing which is 5 hours and 15 minutes. Let's do that. LocalTime.of, my bad. Now let us do this thing. We have the dates and we have the times over here. So let us create a local date time object out of it. More and more practice, guys. I'm creating different types of instances so that you'll get a lot of practice. Dates times equals to local date time. Let us use that variation of the of, where I'm gonna pass the dates object and the times object. So dates and times. Great. So we have our new local dates times object over here. And let's see, let's print it out first. Print it out, dates times, and if we print this out and run the code, we're gonna get this thing, which is cool, entirely cool. And let us do this thing. Dates times equals to, for example, we're gonna say dates times dot minus days and 1. So I've told you, right, you can invoke any kind of plus days, minus days, hours, minutes, seconds thing on the date time object, because it is a combination of both local date and local time. So it should work. If I say dates times now over here, we're gonna get a new object just before the day 20th, which is 19th in this case, right? Okay, so if I do for example dates times equals to dates times dot minus hours, and gonna subtract 1 hour from it. And if I say sysout dates times, and if you see, we subtracted 1 hour, which is 4 hours and 15 minutes. Before it was 5 hours and 15 minutes. Similarly, you can perform the minus seconds and whatever you're gonna want to do. Okay, it's very common thing to do. We saw this when we are gonna talk about strings, right? Sorry, we have already talked about strings and string builder. We talked about method chaining at that point. And it is also very common to use method chaining while dealing with this local time, local date, and local date time objects. So let us see an example of method chaining and how it can make yourselves a little bit confused. Alright, let us try this out. Let us create a new local date object. I'm doing this over and over again because if you guys are practicing with me, please do it over and over again for more and more practice. Local date with chaining, let's give it dates1 equals to local date dot, for example, of, let's give 2020, and month as, for example, 1 or January. You can use the enum also, whatever you want, and then 20. Then let's take a local time, and time equals to times 1 equals to local time dot of, for example, 5 hours and 15 minutes. Actually, there's a better way. If you don't have, we are creating a lot of variables and it is a pain because we have to change the variable name every time. If you just want to create a local date time instance out of local date and local time, instead of creating this, you can directly pass this as a parameter. So what I mean by that is local date time, local date time dates times 1 equals to local date time dot of. So what I mean is just take this, copy this one from here, because it just returns an instance, right? So it's cool. You can also pass this from here as a time instance over here, right? So if you do that, you can just remove this from here. So basically they return an instance of this thing, right? So you can just pass it over here so that you can work with that instance. Let us change some things, right? Dot minus days 1, then dot minus hours, and we're gonna say 10, and then we're gonna say dot minus seconds, and we're gonna say, for example, 30. Now when you have a lot of manipulations to make, right, and these things come into mind, like we can do a lot of chaining and it should work, right? So if I do a sysout and dates times 1, and if you see the code, you can see that we went like minus days 1, so days was like 20, so it is saying 19 over here. 5 hours, we said a minus hours over here, so it was 5. Previously we said 5, but now minus 10 hours. Now I think it is 14:30, right? And then minus seconds 30. So basically 30 seconds were also chopped out of this particular local date time object. Alright, so that's how it is, method chaining, and it kind of comes in handy a lot, but still the exam creators will try to trick you in this particular concept, because yeah, it's a tricky concept when you can create tricky questions out of it, right? So one of those tricky things is that they will not return the date object, they will not store the date object again. Like I told you over here, right, this is one of those tricky situations where they will do some like plus days, but they will not store it in the reference variable, and they will try to print the same reference variable. So remember, here there will be no change to the local date object because they are immutable. And I'm telling this over and over again. I'm sorry if it is annoying you guys, but a lot of people make mistakes, and when they're reading the question and they think that, okay, I do not have much time, so it should work like this, but actually it doesn't work like that. You have to restore that particular change into another reference variable or in the same reference variable. You can override the same reference variable like we did sometimes over here, for example, in here, right? I hope that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so these are the methods that you can work with in the local date time classes. And also there is a specific class known as a period class. Okay, period. And periods are basically a period of time, right? And let us understand what this period means. Let us take an example of understanding period with an real life scenario, right? So there is a zoo, all right, a zoo where they keep animals, all right. So a zoo performs animal enrichment activities to give the animals something fun to do, right? So the head zookeeper has decided to switch the toys every month. So the animals play with some toys. I don't know where this idea came into my mind, but whatever. So switch the toys every month. So the system will continue for 3 months and to see how it works out. So what I will do is I will create a method over here, and I'm gonna just name this method as static void perform animal enrichment, something like that. This method will receive two parameters. One will be local date start and local date end. So it will take two parameters, the start date and the end date, and basically it will check like if the 1 month has passed or not, and if it is passed then we just gonna switch the toys. So how do we check that? So I'm just gonna take another object over here, like create a new reference variable. So local date up to, so up to something like that, up to equals to, for example, start. So we're gonna start from this particular point, and we're gonna say while up to, because we are storing this in a new way, like a temporary variable, because we don't want to lose this start thing, right? We don't want to make any changes in the start local date object. That's why we are taking a temporary variable up to. So if up to is dot is before, now this is before method is used to compare two local date or time objects. I haven't talked about this right now because I'm using this right now, so I thought like I'll tell you right now about it. So we use, like with numbers, what we do, we use the less than, greater than, equals to, less than, equals to, right? But when it comes to local date objects or local date time objects, we have to use the specialized method for comparison. So if up to is before, I hope you guessed it, end. So what will happen, that until this condition is true, this particular loop will run. So so we're gonna check like this, and we're gonna say system.out.println, and we're gonna say give new toy, right? And plus up to, it means that up to this point give the new toy, and then we're gonna add up to now. Up to equals to up to dot plus months, and we're gonna say 1, right? So like every month we're gonna give a new toy. That's what it means. And I think that should work for now, and let us call that method over here, and let us say perform animal enrichment, and the start we're gonna give as, for example, LocalDate.of, and we're gonna give the year as 2015, for example, month as, for example, month.January, and day of month, for example, we're gonna give as 1, and for the end, let us just copy this instance, and we're gonna paste it at the end, and so it is 2015 January, sorry, not January, let's make it March or something, and let us give this like 30. So we're gonna give a span of 3 months starting from January till March, January, February, March. So if I run this code, let's see what we get. So what is happening over here, I told you, right, that every month a new toy will be given to the particular animal. So it started with January, so in every month we are giving a new toy. So starting with January we gave a new toy, then February we gave a new toy, and March we gave a new toy. So if we extend the particular time, then similarly number of toys will also go up like that. January, February, March, April, May, June. So every month a new toy will be given. Hope that makes sense. Now the code works fine. It adds a month to the date until it hits the end date. The problem is that the method can't be reused. So our zookeeper wants to try different schedules to see which works the best, right? If there are different schedules, and if, for example, there is a different schedule altogether, then this method is pretty much of rigid. We cannot make a flexible method out of it. It just accepts the start and the end, and then it just calculates the number of toys, for example. So how can we make it a little bit flexible? We can do that by the use of period class. Now what does the period class do? So now you saw that this is the method that we have currently. So what we're gonna do is, instead with the start and the end local date, we're gonna pass in a period class, period. Now just pay some attention what is gonna happen over here, right? So we're gonna pass in the period, and the same thing, we're gonna store it in a temporary variable so that we keep a track of the start. And now what we're gonna do is, we're gonna do the same thing. Up to is before end, that is fine. We're gonna, instead of adding a plus months over here, because this is what it makes it rigid, right? Because we're just adding the months over here. If, for example, the schedule changes to, for example, instead of like 1 month, it is 2 months now, or 45 days or 6 months, who knows, the schedule may change. In that case, this period actually comes a lot in handy. So instead of doing a up to dot plus months one, we're gonna do up to dot plus. There is a method known as plus over here, and it accepts a temporal amount, and period is one of the temporal classes that you can use. Don't worry about all this temporal and everything. That is not that much important as of now. So up to dot plus, we're gonna say period. So what will happen, instead of adding a rigid 1 month value to the particular current up to instance, we're gonna just add a period instead of that particular month. I hope that makes sense. Now we're gonna create a new period object over here to pass into this method. So we're gonna just say period equals to period. That's the same way of creating, right, the local date and local time classes and all. So period.of, and we're gonna pass of months, right, of months over here, and we're gonna say 1. So of months will create a period of 1 month, guys, right? It will create a period of 1 month. So we're gonna go over here, and we're gonna have an additional parameter which is comma period, and I hope the code works the fine as it is. So if we go over here, so the code is working fine as it should work. Alright, now if you I hope you guys understood the importance of period, because I wanted to show you like how actually period works in real time scenarios, and basically this is how it works, right? So you don't have to like give it months, right? You can also create off year also, right? If you want to change the schedule from a month to a year, and if we pass 1, and if you run the code, then only one, you can see one toy is changed, because you want to change the toys every year now instead of months. So you just modify this period, instead of month you make it years. Okay, I hope that makes some sense. So if you want to add weeks, you're gonna say off weeks. If you want to add days, then you can just say off days over here, right? So gonna just do a comment over here. There are off weeks method, off days method, and so on, and off months that we had used earlier, right? Now what if you wanna create a specific period out of it? Like for example, you want to make a flexible period. I don't want a year or a day or a month. I want to create my own period of, for example, 1 year and 7 days. Is this possible? Yes, it is possible. In this case, for example, I'm gonna name this thing as period custom period, right, equals to, we're gonna create our own period, right? Like for example, 1 year and 10 days. How do you do that? So we're gonna use the period class like it is period dot. We're gonna use a off method instead of off days, months or weeks. And in this off method, we're gonna pass the years, for example 1 year, months, for example 0 months, and because we don't want any month as a period. Now here remember that this months over here is different from the months of the local date class, guys. Here you specify how many number of months you need as a period. I have specified 0, so it will not count any month now. And days, I'm just gonna say 10 days. So now what will happen is that a period of custom period of 1 year and 10 days will be created. Why did this thing happen? You want to ask me a question, why can't we chain these methods instead of creating this one? So what do I mean is that, can I do this thing? Can I do period dot of years, first of all, for example 1 year, then of days 10 days? Is it possible to do this? I mean, it's possible. There are no errors, but it will not work as expected. Now, what do I mean by it will not work as expected? The thing is that when you chain these period methods, only the last method that you see, which is of days, it is going to get executed. And why is that? The reason is that these methods are all static methods. Okay, and you can see that other methods like the normal instance methods that we had, because of returns you an instance, right? So the thing is, if you're gonna try minus seconds, minus hours, minus days, so it is easily getting changed over there. But over here, as these are all static methods, you can see there is also a little bit italics over the methods, and in Eclipse, if you have italics over methods, then it means that it's a static method. So due to that reason, if you try to chain the methods of the period class, it is not gonna work. Only the last method is gonna work. It means that only 10 days will be the period instead of 1 year and 10 days. Right? I hope that makes sense, because it is very, very important to understand, and the examiner will try to trick you. So if there is if the examiner is trying to create a new period, custom period, and there are two options, one of those options is this one and another option is this one, make sure you choose this one. It means that it doesn't, this option will not throw any compilation issue or something, but it will not work as expected. Alright, so I hope you understood this concept, that chaining in the period methods is not possible like it works with the normal local date, local date time and all. Okay. Now you've probably noticed by now that a period is a day or more of time, right? We have days, years and something like that, months. But there is also another class which is known as duration. Which is intended for smaller units of time. Now because you see that by using periods, the minimum period that you can create is 1 day, right? It cannot create like 2 hours or 3 hours. It is not possible in the case of the period class. We can use a duration class which is intended for smaller units of time. For duration, you can specify the number of days, hours, minutes, seconds or nanoseconds, right? And yes, you can pass 365 days to make a year, but you really shouldn't. If you are going to create that much bigger amount of a duration, then it is better to go with a period. But to be frank, duration class is not present on the OCA exam. It is present in the OCP exam. So if you are going to target the OCA exam, guys, it is not necessary to learn about the duration class. But to give you an example, if you want to create a duration, for example minutes duration, for example, equals to, you can just say duration dot of. If you see, similarly like we had of years, of months, of days in the period, we have days, hours, milliseconds, minutes, nanos, seconds. So you can create very, very precise durations, guys, of minutes, nanoseconds and seconds. Very, very easy. If I want to create like a duration of 10 minutes, I'm going to just say of minutes, I'm going to pass 10. Similarly, like you work with for example a period, you work with a duration, right? And it is pretty much easy to use a duration. For example, if you want to add a duration to a local time object, you can do that. Like for example, if I want to add that duration of 10 minutes to this times object, I can do times dot plus. I'm going to use the plus method and I'm going to just say minutes. So what it will do, it will add those 10 minutes to the times local time object. See, the way you apply the methods is pretty much of same for every date and time API object. Only thing you need to remember, where are you applying it? For example, if you're gonna apply this minutes, the duration minutes to a particular local date object, it's not gonna work there because that's a date and this is a time. Period is gonna work with local date, time is gonna work with local time, and both is gonna work with local date time object. So the thing is, it works the same in every kind of date time object that we have in the DateTime API, but you should remember, where are you applying to it? Is it possible? Is it compatible? The compatibility is very, very important in this case. Okay, right? Because if you try to do this thing, if you try to add a dates dot add, for example, plus, let me give you an example, it will be pretty much clear. If I try to add the duration to a date, for example, if I try to do this thing, first of all, it is not even accepting it over here. It is saying duration cannot be, okay, sorry, minutes, my bad. So see, it is accepting because duration is a temporal type. Duration is a temporal type. Period is also a temporal type. If so, it means that this method is going to accept any kind of temporal type, right? So that's what I mean. But the thing is, when you try to execute the code, it is throwing some exception, and that is basically unsupported temporal time exception. Unsupported unit, which is seconds. Obviously, you cannot add a duration to a particular period, to a particular local date. Similar thing is with the time. You cannot add a period to a local time object, right? That's what you should keep in mind always. I hope it makes sense. Okay. So that was all about periods and durations, guys, and just be clear on this concept because some questions are coming in the exam and you need to be sure of when you are working with them, right? Now let us talk about how do you format dates and times, right? Alright, now let us talk about formatting dates and times, right? Formatting dates and times. Now before going into formatting dates and times, if you have a specific use case where you just wanna get the day or the month or the year out of a local date, you can try its built-in methods, right? So let us take an example. So I should be having one of those dates objects. We have this dates object. So if I try to find out, for example, the month of that particular date, so we can use a method that is known as getMonth. Just a minute, it's just hanged for a bit. Okay, this is annoying. Whatever. So yeah, system.out.println, I'm gonna just say dates.get day of month, right? Day of month, or you can just say get month, for example. Sorry, get month. So there are two actually methods over here. One is get month and get month value. So the get month value will actually return you value of the month, like which is 1 to 12, right? And get month will actually return you a month, which is an enum, right? And if I wanna, for example, get the day or something like that, dates dot get day of week, for example, it will return you day of week, which is, for example, an enum, which will be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or something like that. If I'm gonna say dates dot get year, it should return me the particular year that the the date object was constructed in, right? If I now try to run this code, we should be getting exactly this, January, Monday, and 2014, which is cool, right? So this you can use for for exact things. Similarly, for local time, there are methods like, for example, get hour, get minutes, and something like that. You can use those methods as well. Now this is good, this is fine. However, it would be more work than necessary, right? If you want a specific format, you have to extract everything by yourself and then do it, right? But for specific use cases, this works fine. Now, but for certain cases, you just need the date or time in a particular format, and that becomes really cumbersome if you do it like this. So we need to format it. So but to format your local date and local time or whatever, there is a class which you can use to format this thing, which is known as the DateTimeFormatter, right? DateTimeFormatter, and it is present in the package java.time.format. Alright, so let us talk about how we can format the dates and times. And as we just discussed, we need the DateTimeFormatter class, right, to format the dates and times, and it is present in the time.format class. So we need to create a DateTimeFormatter object first, and then use that object to actually format the dates and times. Now, talking about the regular expression that we need as a pattern for the formats, right, because we need to provide a pattern and based on which that particular date and time will be formatted. But if you are not familiar with regex as of now, or the symbols for the formatting purposes, it's fine, because the DateTimeFormatter provides you with some standardized predefined formats like short format, ISO format, and something like that. If your requirements are those, you can directly use them. Let me give an example of what I mean. So let me just create DateTimeFormatter over here like this, and let me name it as short what we're gonna say as short date time or something like that, right? So let us do this thing. So let us do this short date time, and we're gonna say DateTimeFormatter, right? And we're gonna just do a dot of localized date. Now we're gonna provide a format style over there, and over here we're gonna provide the format style, which will be a predefined format style. Let us say I'm gonna say format style dot short. So you can see that if I do a dot, there are some predefined format styles like full, long, medium, short, and something like that, right? I'm just gonna go with short over here, and we're gonna format one of those date time objects that I have. Let's say this date times one object, right? So to do that, it's pretty simple actually. We're gonna output that on the console. So let's take a system.out.println, and then for example we can just do a short date time. We're gonna do a format on this date time object, right? So I think it is done. If I run the code right now, and if I just do a right click and run as Java application, I should get this is a short format. If you see, it is a 2/20/23. So basically it is the month and then the date and then the year, right? Because if I go to this date time object, it should be like month is February, this is 2023, and then we have this 20, which is the date. You can also use it for local date objects, right? Obviously, because it's of localized date, it is for used for dates only. So you can do this thing also. Sys out, let's pick a dates. I should be having a local date object somewhere. Let's take this one and let us do the format on that. So short date time.format, and we're gonna pass in the dates, which is a local date object, right? And you can see that the same thing happens here, because it is actually formatting the dates, right? So if I do this thing, right, if I try to, for example, do a sys out, and we're gonna try to do a short date time.format, and we're gonna pass in a time, right, like time 1. What do you think will happen in this case? As I've told you, right, this format, that is the short format, and it's using a off localized date. It means that it will format the date only. What happens if we pass a time over here? So if I run the code right now, we should be having an exception, and that exception is known as UnsupportedTemporalTypeException, and you need to keep this exception in mind while working in the exam. So it is a unsupported temporal type exception. So we talked about two types of exception. One is the date time exception, and another one is unsupported temporal type exception. So that date time exception occurs when we try to manipulate the date and time, and this exception occurs when we pass in a wrong, like an object, into the format function, right? So you should keep all these things in your mind. These are some tips while appearing for the exam. I hope that helps. Now if you're gonna use the other way around, you can do the other way around. Like for example, we are using the format method on the DateTimeFormatter class itself. We can go for the other way around. What is the other way around? You can do this thing. For example, DateTime1.format, and we're gonna pass in the format object itself over here, and we can pass like short date time, and that's it. That's how you're gonna do it. If I run the code now, the output should be pretty much the similar thing, right? So you can do either like the DateTimeFormatter dot format function, and then pass in like the temporal object, which is like the date or the local date time. And the other way around is to use the format function on the local date time or the local date object, right? So vice versa is possible either ways. So yeah, keep that in mind. If you see something like this in the exam, like the opposite of here, then it will not throw any compilation issues. It will work fine as expected, right? Alright, so I think that should work. And okay, so keep that in mind, that unsupported temporal type exception, if you are using off localized. See, there are various methods in this DateTimeFormatter object. Let us have a look on it, and let us see which works with what. If I do a DateTimeFormatter dot off, so you can see there is a off localized date over here, and as the function suggests, if you create a format style using off localized date in the DateTimeFormatter class, then it will only work with the local date or the local date time object, right? If you're gonna create an off localized date time, if you use this off localized date time as the function, then what do you think will happen? If you work with a local date time object, then it will work. If you work with a local date object, it will not work. If you work with a local time object, it will also not work. Throw an unsupported temporal type exception. See, based on this methods, you will be able to determine actually which temporal type object will work with it, right? If I do a off localized time, if I say format style dot, so for example medium, right? And if I try to do this thing, you know what, let's do let's actually store it in a local variable, right? And then just pass it over here. For example, let's do a dates dot format, and we're gonna pass this off localized time formatter inside this. What do you think will happen? Obviously we're gonna get a unsupported temporal type exception, because this formatter that we created is for local time objects only. If I try to pass in for example a dates, if I try to format the date or local date object on this, then we're gonna have a unsupported temporal type exception. So let's comment this, and let us just copy this from here and paste it below, and just do a time dot format. If I perform this on a local time object, then it will, I think, work. So you can see that here it is in the medium format, right? So this is very, very important to remember that. See, like if it is using a predefined date formatter, you have to notice what kind of function it is using. Is it using a off localized date? Is it using a off localized time? So you should be keeping that in mind. Or is it using a off localized date and time? Based on that, there will be a unsupported temporal type exception if the wrong temporal object goes into it, right? I hope that makes sense. I hope you don't get confused in the exam, and if you still have doubts, please put it in the chat sections. Okay, now let us move forward. So what if you wanna, for example, create a pattern, right? We talked about like this short, this medium, there's the, there is a format style long, then there is a format style full. You can play around with these format style as long as you want, but you see we are actually restricted to these 3 or 4 format styles. What if you want a separate style of date pattern that you want? You have to use some symbols for it, right? And some basic symbols you need to remember for the exam and also for your day-to-day lives, right? Let us try out a pattern and let's see what are the symbols that I'm talking about. So let me create a DateTimeFormatter object now. DateTimeFormatter, let's say this is a pattern, right? Equals to, we're gonna use DateTimeFormatter dot, we're gonna use a off pattern over here. Instead of using a off localized time or off localized date, which is basically supports a specific temporal type object, we're gonna use a pattern over here. And in the pattern, let me pass some pattern, right? Let's say I want months first, so I'm gonna say MMMM, which is a long format for months, right? And then gonna pass a DD over here, so then the day. So for example, Feb, and then we have this 20th, right? And then we're gonna give a comma over here, and we're gonna say, for example, the year now, which is YYYY, great. And then I also want the hours and minutes after that, so I'm gonna say HH and then MM, great. Now, what do you think this pattern will work on? Let us see. If I do sysout pattern dot format, and we're going to pass the date time object over here, date time 1. If I do this and if I run the code, then you see that I'm getting a very good pattern of what I wanted, like the long format of the month with the day over here, with the year, and then the time, which is 6 hours and 20 minutes. If I pass in, for example, the pattern dot format, and if I pass the dates object, which is a local date object, and if I pass in that, you can see I'm receiving a what? I'm receiving an unsupported temporal type exception. Now see, this is I haven't used the off localized time method over here. I've used the off pattern, but still I got this unsupported temporal type exception. I'm just gonna write it in short form so that I don't have to type much. Why? Because see, if I had kept it until this point, which is just for the dates, then it would have worked for the dates. When it comes to this pattern, it says hours and minutes, which is not present in a date, in a local date. So that is why I am getting this unsupported temporal type exception, right? Should keep in mind that even though if I'm not using this predefined methods, still if you provide a wrong pattern to a wrong temporal type object, then you're gonna still get that unsupported temporal type exception. If I remove this now, then I should be working fine, because months, days and years are present in a local date object, right? I hope that makes a lot of sense. So how do you remember these patterns, right? That is very, very important. It's actually very easy to remember. There are some, for examples, you don't have to remember everything for the exam. Just need to remember that, okay, if I have a M, then it's a month. If I have a DD, then it's a day. If I have a small y, it's a year. And then if I have HH, which is an hour, and then if I have a MM, it's minutes, right? I don't have to remember everything for the exam. And even if you are working in a day-to-day life, just search for like the pattern in the internet and just place it over here. Don't have to worry about it. Why will you remember so much time? Okay, and if you're thinking about how we used to do in the old way, like before Java 8, then we used to use the simple date format, okay, for the old way before Java 8. But as I've told you, it is not at all required to learn about this. So just know that, okay, we used to use the simple date format, and if you're interested in this, you can search it in the internet and you can find a lot of examples. But I'm not going to show you the examples because it's just a waste of time. You don't have to do this. Nobody uses it right now, right? Okay, that's great. So I hope that made a lot of sense. Let us cover the last part of this particular lecture, which is parsing date and times. Parsing date and times. And now that you know, right, how to convert a date and time to a formatted string, and you'll find it easy to convert a string to a date and time. Just like the format method that we used, the parse method takes a formatter, and if you don't specify one, it uses the default for that type. Now what do I mean by that? Let us, I have already have a datetime formatter. Let's create another object of datetime formatter. Let me explain what do I mean. So pattern 1, for example, and let us keep the for example the pattern as very easy, MM, DD and YYYY. So it's a month, day and year, very easy, right? And let us create a local date pattern date equals to, I don't think I have any much choice of variables right now, because I have like done a lot of stuff. I'm just gonna say local date dot parse method, and I'm gonna just pass in the text over here, and I'm gonna just pass in, for example, 01/02/2015, and here another variable I'm gonna pass in the pattern. So what will happen is that it will take the pattern and it will pass the date in the pattern, right? It means that it will pass the date based on the particular pattern, right? And if I do a sysout over here and if I just print the pattern date, and it should get, we should receive the local date object according to the pattern that I just specified, right? I hope that makes sense. So parsing is consistent that if anything goes wrong, Java throws a runtime exception. You know that, right? If like anything goes wrong, you will be facing a for example, a runtime exception, right? And it is very easy to understand. I don't think I have to explain it more. So it just parsing is just the opposite of what you do to converting a date to a string. You are converting it back to a local date object. That's what you mean. And if you want a specific pattern, you can just get the take the pattern and place it over there, right? So it will just parse the date according to the pattern. And if you do not place the pattern over there, what will happen? It will just take the default pattern, right? And I hope that makes a lot of sense. Okay guys, I hope that lecture made a lot of sense to you and you are good with the date time API in Java 8. And if you still have any questions, please write it down in the chats. And I think this much knowledge is enough for you to pass the exam and for your day-to-day coding also. Alright, so that's it for this particular episode. We're gonna wait in the next lecture. Till then, have a nice day. Bye bye.